Today is lab number 5, which is about connective tissues. Connective tissue proper, in fact. This is another lab where we're doing histology, where we're looking at microscopic images of tissues. You got to remember that a tissue is a collection of cells that is going to have a common structure and a common function. So cells that basically look similar to one another, usually, and do a similar job. Now, you've done a lot of epithelial tissues, and one of the things we noticed about epithelial tissue was just how packed together the cells were. All right, this is different. Connective tissue is different. The cells are not packed together. I mean, in fact, look at this. Look at all these purple nuclei that we have here. A couple are neighbors, but there's a lot of space and stuff between the nuclei. In other words, between the cells. Now, this is a characteristic of almost every connective tissue. We'll meet one exception later, but almost every connective tissue is not dominated by cells. Instead, almost every connective tissue is dominated, mostly composed of something called extracellular matrix. So connective tissues are made of extracellular matrix. That's their dominant, their most abundant component. It's one of the things that defines them. Another thing that defines connective tissues is they have a common embryonic origin. So the connective tissues all come from the same beginnings in the early human. All right, now when I say extracellular matrix, and that's what dominates connective tissue, it just sort of should spark the question, well, what is that? Well, let's break that down. Extracellular, outside of cells. Matrix, this is a kind of a fancy way to saying stuff. So connective tissue is mostly made of stuff outside of cells. And that stuff, which we'll examine, is extracellular matrix. All right, there are still a good number of nuclei in this picture, and I want to point out one of these nuclei to you. Look at this guy right here, green arrows on him. That is a fibroblast. Think of the word fibroblast as fiber maker. So fiber, blast, maker. The fibroblast makes fibers. Fibers, of which we see a bunch in here, are great for connective tissue. This is because connective tissues are for protection, for connecting, connecting, right? For support. Fibers do this wonderfully. And we see two varieties of fibers here. There are these skinny purple fibers. There's one blue arrow pointing on him. There are these skinny purple-ish fibers. There's a lot of them. These are called elastic fibers. So elastic fibers are elastic. This means they do two things. They stretch and they recoil. They are part of the matrix. So cells are not as strong and supportive as fibers can be. So to make this connective tissue supportive and strong, we have a lot of fibers, like these elastic fibers, which are the skinnier ones. Now there's some other ones. They're a little fainter, but they're bigger. This pink guy right here, with the red arrow indicating him, that is called a collagen fiber. Collagen fibers are super strong. In fact, they have this strength called tensile strength, which means they resist tension or pulling forces. So two kinds of fibers. One that helps the tissue maintain its shape because it can stretch and snap back or recoil. Another which is really strong. Elastic fibers, stretch and recoil. Collagen fibers, high tensile strength. Both of these guys are components of the extracellular matrix, which is the stuff outside the cells that dominates connective tissue. And we can see the cell that is the maker of the fibers, whose name basically translates as fiber maker, and is the fibroblast. I see a lot of fibroblasts in here. All right, let's look at some more areolar connective tissue, which, oh my God, I forgot to tell you, this is called areolar connective tissue. I left out its name until the very end. This is areolar connective tissue. And you're probably wondering, you're thinking right now that, like, where do we find this tissue in the body? Well, let me tell you, this tissue is going to be under every epithelium. It's going to support every single epithelium. So if you find an epithelium, and remember how epithelia faced a space, and that was their apical side, and the other side was basal? Well, under the basal side, next to, adjacent to the basal side, we're always going to have this areolar connective tissue. So it's under every epithelium, which means it's found throughout your body. Okay, that being said, this is another view of areolar connective tissue. All right, everybody's a little different. Every tissue is a little different. Like, it's not going to be identical, but there are commonalities here. Let's start with this blue guy right here. Look at that. Look at that fiber. That is an elastic fiber right there. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's so many elastic fibers here. I see some kind of thick, wavy collagen. Not quite as pink as in the other slide. That's okay. Another collagen up here. Now, I also see a fibroblast right here. Beautiful fiber maker. But I see another cell. This cell right here, this guy, I want to draw on him. This guy, right, let's go light blue. This guy right here is what's called a mast cell. He is called a mast cell. All right, this is going to make sense in a second. Okay, check out in the mast cell all of these little granules. Some of the granules have leaked out. So that's why they're like outside the cell here. Sometimes that happens when you make a slide, stuff gets squished out. These granules are going to contain a pair of chemicals. One is called histamine, one is called heparin. These are involved in inflammation. You may think, oh, inflammation, that's something bad. Well, you know what? It's not. Inflammation is your basic response to any tissue damage. 99.9% of the time, inflammation is a great and good thing. And inflammation, literally on fire, things turn red, right, when they're inflamed. That's because they get more blood flow. These two H chemicals, histamine and heparin, are going to make blood vessels bigger. The word for that, of course, you may have heard of it, is vasodilate. And so these two chemicals, histamine and heparin, are released in response to tissue damage by a mast cell, and we find that mast cell in areolar connective tissue. Now, you might be wondering, why does areolar connective tissue have a mast cell? Well, let's go back for a second here. Like, not even 2 minutes ago, I told you areolar connective tissue was under every epithelia. And epithelia are coverings and linings. Well, what are you likely to damage? Coverings and linings. Think about, you have epithelium on your outside your skin, lining your oral cavity, lining the tubes that run through your bodies. I'm talking like digestive tract, repro tract, urinary tract, respiratory tract. You damage those because they're exposed to things. When you damage them, you need inflammation. So the supporting connective tissue has mast cells which are going to facilitate that inflammation. All right, fantastic. Let's keep going. Okay, what I want you to do is touch your screen, poke your screen, and touch some collagen fibers, elastic fibers, fibroblast nuclei, and a pair of mast cells. They're not quite as beautifully granular as the one on the previous page, but I see 2 mast cells here, and they still have a granularity to them. So do that. Pause this recording if need be. All right, sweet. We are done with our first connective tissue, which was areolar. We're about to do another connective tissue called adipose tissue. Adipose basically means fat. But we're not going to say fat tissue, we're going to say adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is weird amongst connective tissues because it is mostly made of cells. It is the oddball, the outlier of connective tissues. Almost every connective tissue is made mostly of matrix. Adipose tissue is weird because it is mostly cells. It's got a scanty amount of matrix. It's got some, but not a lot. All right. I want you to stare at this picture for a second with me here. Stare intently at it and look at all these sort of empty circles here. These empty circles are actually fat cells. We don't call them fat cells, we call them adipocytes. I probably should, when I underline, I shouldn't cross words out. You know what I mean? Adipocytes. Adipocytes are cells that store fat. So these cells are going to look empty because in real life, in the human body, this space in here would be filled with like a droplet of oil, a droplet of fat. So you would find stored fat in this space right here. Okay? Stored fat in there. All right. You may wonder, where's the nucleus? And the nuclei are pushed off to the side in these cells. There's a nucleus right there. I got the blue arrow on another nucleus right there. The nucleus is pushed off to the side. If you want to sound fancy, you could say it is in an eccentric position. Eccentric, away from the center. The stored fat pushes it to the side. If I drew a big old fat cell right here, the nucleus, which of course I'm going to color purple, is pushed off to the side, utterly squished, and then the big droplet of fat is in there, taking up the majority of the volume of the cell. Sometimes you don't even see the nucleus just because it's off to the side and you just don't happen to see it. So there's some of these cells where it's like, where's the nucleus? It has one, you just don't see it because it got pushed off to the side. All right. So this is adipose tissue, fat tissue. Obviously, if you're storing fat, you're storing energy. Fat is important to us for other reasons. We have fat around a lot of organs, kidneys, heart, eyeballs, and it provides a shock absorption function there. Plus the fat under our skin. There's fat under our dermis. Remember we saw the skin model, we saw the hypodermis, and the fat under there is for thermal insulation. Prevents heat from leaving your body. Okay. Good. Oh, let's go on to the next slide. There we go. All right, another situation where I want you to find me adipocytes, find me some nuclei of those adipocytes, find me the space inside the adipocyte as well. Whoops, there we go. And just in case you were wondering, this is a blood vessel right up here. If you're like, what's that thing? That's a blood vessel. All right, 2 connective tissues down. 2 to go. We're halfway done, guys. And what we have here is our first dense connective tissue. If this is our first dense connective tissue, then the other 2 kind of must have been loose, right? Now, the word dense, refers to the packing of fibers. This tissue is going to be dense with fibers. Adipose tissue wasn't dense with fibers because it was weird. It did not have a lot of matrix. Areolar connective tissue, it had fibers, but if we went back, let's go back. Let's go back. Here's some areolar tissue. The fibers are there, but they're spread out. I mean, they crisscross and stuff, but there's still a lot of white space in here, right? Yeah. But dense connective tissue has tightly packed collagen fibers. Look at all the vertical pink lines here. These are collagen fibers that have been packed together. Now, this is dense regular connective tissue. Dense regular because the fibers are all going in the same direction. Dense regular connective tissue fibers are exhibiting the two P's. They're packed in parallel. And what this is going to do is give this tissue a whole lot of tensile strength. If you pulled on it this way and this way, it would be really hard to tear this tissue because there's so many collagen fibers arranged in parallel fashion. That's dense and regular. Now we are going to find this tissue in two organs, ligaments and tendons. Ligaments are going to anchor bone to bone. So it's going to attach one bone to another bone. Tendons are going to attach muscles to bones. And these are situations where there's a lot of pulling force. And because there's a lot of pulling force, we need a lot of tensile strength. And because we need a lot of tensile strength, we have a lot of collagen packed tightly together. All right, one other thing we do see is we see some fibroblasts. We do see some fibroblasts hanging out in here. All these purple guys are fibroblasts. If we have fibers, undoubtedly we're going to have fibroblasts. All right. Let's keep on going. I got another picture of dense regular tissue. I want you to find the collagen fibers. I want you to find their orientation, like are they going vertically, what are they doing? And find me a whole bunch of fibroblast nuclei. So do that, and when you're done that, we're done with three of the four connective tissues for today. We have one more dense connective tissue. It's called dense irregular. All right, it's dense, which means it has a lot of collagen. Look at all the pinkness we see here. But now it's irregular. This means all the collagen is not going in the same direction. All right, they're going in many different directions. I actually just saw a typo on my slide here. This word tissue should read directions. They're pointing in myriad directions. This gives us strength in many directions. Okay, if I look, check out how some of my collagen fibers look like ovals or circles. That's because they were cut in cross-section, transversely. And some other ones are going more diagonal or more horizontal. All right, that's because they're cut longitudinally, just like you do at the tube in lab number 1. Okay, dense irregular connective tissue, lots of collagen, tightly packed, but fibers going in many different directions. Gives us strength in many directions. And one place we have this is in the connective tissue of the skin, which is called the dermis of the skin. Now, of course, since we got fibers, we'll also have these little purple things. Those, of course, are fibroblast nuclei. We would find this in other places in the body too, like around your joints, around organs as well. We'll actually see this tissue over and over again in the next 2 semesters. Okay, we are onward to the last slide. No, almost the last slide. Haha, getting ahead of myself. We're on the last tissue. This is another slide of dense irregular connective tissue. I want you to find me collagen fibers and fibroblast nuclei. And then we can go on and look at some skin. This is thin skin. Remember, thin skin was everywhere in your body except plantar and palmar. Thin skin, like all skin, has an epidermis, which we see with this yellow bracketed region. That's the epidermis, which, if you remember, is made of stratified squamous epithelial tissue. Now, the red and the blue are the connective tissue under the epidermis. So this red and blue right here is the dermis. And there's two parts to the dermis. The red part is on the papillary part, which we talked about, the bumpy part in skin, which anchors these two guys together. This is a mix of tissues. It'll have areolar, a little dense irregular, a little it'll have nerves in there, blood vessels. But then down here, this blue arrow is in something called the reticular layer of the dermis, and it is made of dense irregular connective tissue. We see lots of collagen fibers, the pink things here. They're going in many different directions. They don't really have a pattern to them. We see fibroblasts, little purple guys right here. So this is dense, irregular connective tissue found in the reticular dermis. Reticular means like a net. So somebody thought the multiple directions of these fibers was reminiscent of a net. All right, now we're on the last slide where we see some more dermis with papillary and reticular. This is kind of faded. I don't like the color so much here. I love this one on the right. This one's gorgeous. Papillary layer up top, reticular layer down below. Reticular layer of the dermis, dense, irregular connective tissue. And with that, folks, A&P people, we are done. Lab number 5. As always, email me your questions, thoughts, and concerns. I'll see you guys later. Bye.